Okay, so good evening, everyone. My name's Michelle Maloney. I'm one of the co-founders and conveners and directors of the New Economy Network Australia. Welcome to all of our wonderful NENA members tonight, and also anyone who's new to NENA. Perhaps you're on the Australia reMADE email list. Welcome all of you. So tonight's discussion is going to be, I'm really looking forward to hearing updates from Millie Rooney and Louise Tarrant about Australia reMADE, a wonderful initiative that kicked off several years ago and is now focusing on how we can help build systems change and build networks of leaders and organisations connecting together to do good things. So the format for this evening will be, I'm going to give a brief introduction to the New Economy Network Australia, and I'll then hand over to Millie and Louise, who together will give about half an hour presentation, and then we'll open up for questions and discussions. As always, if you'd like to jot questions down in the chat, that would be great. You're welcome to pop them in as you think of them, or save them towards the end of the half-hour chat. Some of if other people had trouble getting into the call, someone said it was different to usual. I don't think it was set up in any different way. It was just the usual login to the network. So hopefully everyone's not having too much trouble to join. So by way of introducing the New Economy Network Australia, what I thought I would do is actually show you our humble but effective website, because it's a nice way to familiarise people with the work of the New Economy Network Australia. So I'm just going to share screen very quickly, and I won't take long. I thought rather than PowerPoints, I would show you a little bit about what we're up to. The New Economy Network Australia was born from a conference that a few of us organised in 2016 in Sydney. Professor Bronwyn Morgan and myself coordinated it, and then we connected up with many people at the gathering. The inspiration for NENA, we weren't really called NENA until the 2017 conference, but the inspiration for joining up was a number of us had spent several years working on a range of environmental change and social change projects. And of course, one of the key barriers to creating really positive social change in Australia is a dominant economic system that is often characterised by over-extraction, social injustice, and all manner of aspects that are influencing our society. So the folks who founded NENA are very keen to create the kind of systems change that we want to see in broader society by focusing on the dominant paradigm of our day, which is often wrapped up under the umbrella of economics. But I guess I'd like to stress that the New Economy Network is not just about economics. It's really about all the different aspects of how we can build a society that is socially just and ecologically healthy. We've got a range of activities and events, and our website, we've got a webinar series, we've got and everything's run by volunteers. We're completely unfunded. We focus on civil society. Just wanted to show you some of the features and then tell you a little bit about our hubs, because I think that's important, and our civil society strategy. But some features are, we are a cooperative. We encourage people to become members so that you can then join one of our, or many of our hubs. We have volunteers running this really groovy New Economy journal. I'm so proud of them. They do a great job. And we've got a whole range of international connections. We're founding members of the Wellbeing Economy Alliance. We're also members of rePES, which is the Intercontinental Network for the Promotion of the Social Solidarity Economy. Quite a mouthful, possibly one of the reasons why we called ourselves the New Economy Network. To be quite frank, in 2016, when we had the discussions about how could we create an umbrella network for individuals and organisations across civil society without having anyone feel that they're excluded, because if you talk about ecological economics, people in social justice movements don't feel quite sometimes that's for them. Social solidarity or the sharing economy doesn't always make people in environmental movements feel comfortable or feel like that's a focus. So New Economy was chosen because it's everything and nothing all at once. But about a year after we were founded, the Wellbeing Economy Alliance formed up, this big international network. And it's, I think the wellbeing economy framing is becoming a really positive way to wrap up a lot of the stuff we're interested in. So as I said, NENA has been around for a couple of years now, and what we've spent a lot of time on developing is what we call our distributed governance network. All of these little hubs are elements inside the NENA network. Basically, we're an incorporated entity, so we're a co-op, but we really wanted to separate sort of power and authority and action enough that no one really dominated how the network's ideas and development progressed. So we have a structure whereby people in any geographic or local area can create their own local hub, and groups are bubbling up in our Northern Territory hub has just formed up. We've got the Newcastle and Hunter hub, thanks to Megan Burkett and others, is really active. Melbourne meet every month, or they did meet every month. They're on webinars now. And Canberra's fantastic. They've been running a lot of events and activities. So we've got geographic hubs where people can come together around local issues. And then the sectoral hubs are really just a way for people to, probably an entry point for folks to come into NENA around perhaps their daily employment or their daily work, but also a way to progress different activities. So just a few examples. The research hub is made up of academics and researchers from a number of different universities. We've got an MOU with the University of Newcastle. We're going to hold probably an afternoon research jam in September, where people interested in research topics connected to the new economy can come together, and folks in the new economy network can have a listen. There's always that kind of hunger for folks who are doing research to connect with practitioners. That's just one example. The Ecological Economics Hub will soon be combining forces with the Education Hub and thinking about how we can get some courses and other things happening. And just the last example, the Education Hub, we've been really busy developing this really cool new micro course with Griffith University, where a number of NENA experts will be sharing information through an accredited course. So there's lots of different things bubbling along. And I guess the final thing to mention is, if you'd like to get involved, please just sign up to our mailing list, become a member if you can. And we've got the annual conference, the directory for members to find each other, and a few other bits and bobs. But that's about all I really wanted to say. And I'll just quickly type in the website. I'm sure you can easily find that, but if anyone needs it, that's theneweconomy.org.au. So if you've got any questions, I'm really happy to take them at the end about NENA. But what I'd like to do is now introduce Millie and Louise. I was connected to some of the early discussions around Australia reMADE, I think before it had its name. So I was really excited to see how it's been progressing. And so I'm really delighted that you could join us tonight and tell us all about the network and what you've been up to. So I'll hand over to you, and please feel free to introduce yourself with more detail, and I'll go on mute unless you need me. Thank you.
Thanks, Michelle. I'll just share my screen. Great. So thanks, Michelle. It's really great for Louise and I to be here, both because it's lovely to talk to different networks, and also because of your involvement through. It's nice to reconnect and see where we end up again. I'm going to give a bit of an introduction about sort of where Australia reMADE has come from, give a bit of context, and then Louise and I will tag team a bit with some of the content that we've been working on. And as we begin, I'm speaking to you from the quite chilly island of Lutruwita, or Tasmania at the moment, on the land of the Muinina people. And one of the things that has been really important to Australia reMADE is putting at the heart of where we are the fact that we live on land that was stolen land, and also land that has this incredibly traumatic history, but also this amazing, rich history of care and survival for the First Nations people who have been here before us and continue to be a very strong presence here. And that's something that we always try to do as we do this work, is to hold that in our hearts and in our minds and in our connections. Yes, it's always really important. So I'm the National Coordinator for Australia reMADE. I had the very good fortune to accidentally get involved a few years ago as things were forming up, and have been part of its evolution. So at the moment we're calling ourselves, we work on both vision for the Australia that we want, and also the systems change that we're going to need that are going to need to happen to create it. And we're an independent non-profit network. We call ourselves a leadership network for reMAKERS of all parts of society, and that really is everyone from someone down the road who's involved in a local community organisation to CEOs of organisations and NGOs to people in government. We hope to provide a space for lots of different people. We're supported by a core secretariat. So David Ritter from Greenpeace, Kelly O'Shannessy from ACF, Paul Oosting from Get Up, Anne Porcino, who does a lot of work with a lot of different organisations, Archie Law, who originally was with ActionAid when he joined with us, and then Louise is our chair as well. And then there's myself and Lily Spencer and Louise who do a lot of the day-to-day work. And so that's the core group and where most of the energy comes from. But I wanted to tell you a little bit about the background of the story, because I think seeing where we've come from helps to know where we're going. And that's a big part of actually how we work, is knowing where we're coming from and knowing where we're going. So a few years ago, a whole lot of fairly senior people from civil society, organisations, academics, activists got together really with the question of asking, are we all working towards the same thing, and are we all fighting the same thing? And for me, who had never been involved in that before, that was quite an amazing realization to think, wow, there's all of these groups working on refugee issues, climate change, biodiversity, social justice, who hadn't been speaking together before with a united voice in recent times, and not across the whole group. So I think there are a couple of meetings over a couple of years, over a year, where people got together to ask, what is it we're for? Because no is no longer enough. We need some really big yeses, drawing on that work of Naomi Klein. So what would it be for us as civil society, or a collection of broadly progressive organisations, to be vision-led, based in values, but to also think about deep systems transformations, so that while fighting the spot fires are essential, they're not actually enough. And Louisa will talk a bit more about where we've got to with that, but that's where it all came from. And particularly important in that was that we needed to have a vision to unite behind, and we needed to articulate what is it that we shared and where we wanted to go. And I have been shocked time and time again to see everyone talks about vision. Oh yes, it's a good thing, we should have one. But watching what happens when you actually articulate a shared vision is quite powerful, and where you don't just assume that you believe the same thing. Has been a fascinating observation as part of the process. So everyone in these groups agreed that we needed a vision, but of course you can't write a vision for a country when you're a mostly middle class, highly educated, white group of people in a room. You really can't do that, and it's not what we're about. So in 2017, I think, myself and Anne Porcino and a few other people had the incredible privilege of going around and talking to people across the country about the Australia of their dreams. And we talked with people, union delegates. We talked, this picture up on your screen is a sketch of a session run with the Vietnamese community in Melbourne. These three women on the couch there were three older women who didn't speak English and relied on the translator in the room. And I wasn't there, but they sat the whole time with their hats and their coats and their scarves and were very intent on the process. So I kind of love that image. We spoke to people in rural communities, so Gloucester in New South Wales, the Council of Single Mothers and their Children, Indigenous leaders, so a whole range of people who were likely to be broadly sympathetic with the aims of the organisations involved, but whose voices are not usually heard. And we had some open public meetings as well. And we asked very simply, imagine you've woken up in the country of your dreams. What does it look like, feel like, smell like? What is it like for you to live in? And I've done a lot of interviewing of people around a lot of different topics. And this is the first time that, it's like watching people unfurl or come out of their shells and relax for a moment into imagine if we had this world, imagine if we achieved what we want, and imagine if we were for something rather than against something. And that was really extraordinary to see the energy that comes with it, the enthusiasm, and the sense of possibility. I think it was Rutger Bergman who wrote in one of his in Utopia for Realists that we've lost the way of thinking about utopia, and that was certainly my experience. People were unpracticed and extremely thankful to be asked. And so from this process, so we listened to people and then tried to distill it down into what's the shared vision here and where is there conflict. And I'll go through briefly the 9 pillars that make up the Australia reMADE vision, but it's worth noting there was very little conflict across the group. And of course, they were broadly interested in what we were interested in, but we also went in genuinely trying to see if there was difference. And really the only time I ever heard difference was when I walked into a session and the very first thing that people talked about was quite strongly anti-refugee. And, you know, I was a bit taken aback thinking, how am I going to do this? And knew that my job was to be there and just to listen. And we got talking and we unpacked what was going on. And in the end, what the issue was that the people I was talking with were in very precarious employment and felt very threatened themselves and actually deeply cared about vulnerable people. They just didn't believe some of the stories that they were being told, and they thought that some people coming to Australia just didn't need the help. But through that process of listening and talking about what we wanted, we actually got to a really shared understanding. So it was quite a powerful process to go through, and we've used, in lots of different contexts, I've used that process, and it's an amazing way to bring people together. So these are just the first sentences from each of the 9 pillars. I've got links at the end of this slideshow, but I recommend actually going and taking a moment to read the full vision. We often have people telling us that they cried when they read it, and I think it's a sign that we are so busy fighting that sometimes sitting down and calmly thinking, what am I actually for, is quite emotional, but also quite refreshing. So we've got 9 pillars. There's a First Peoples Heart, so I won't read them all, but Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples and cultures are celebrated at the very heart of what it means to be Australian. There's a lot more to this pillar. It was with quite a lot of close consultation with some Aboriginal groups, and really trying to put it in a positive vision of what we're aiming for. Number 2, a natural world for now and the future. Number 3, an economy for the people. I'm looking forward to hearing people's comments around some of that, and I really encourage you to go and have a look at that. A society where every contribution counts and all jobs have dignity. So whatever we do, our contribution to society is recognised, whether it's measurable or payable or not. 5, a diversity of people living side by side. 6, a country of flourishing communities. And it's worth pointing out that through all of this, a lot of this is common sense and a lot of this is already happening. It's about raising up those stories and actually changing the systems to enable this stuff to flourish. 7, a new dawn for women. 8, a thriving democracy. Our government exists for the people, and key to this is that we are engaged citizens, not just at election time, but all through the year, all through the years. And 9, a proud contributor to a just world. So it's about being a leader in the global context. One of the things that I have found very interesting through this process is there has been a lot of, and it's increasing now with COVID, there's a lot of talk about we need vision and how important vision is, but less of a sense of how to use it and what it means to use it in a way that isn't just utopian and isn't just naive. And I've linked here to a blog written by Lily Spencer, who works with us, which kind of goes through some of the arguments for why it's important. But really, in our experience, it has been about there is so much more power in saying yes than saying no. And that's not to say we can't talk about what's wrong. That's a really essential part of what we do. But deciding where we want to go and helping us keep our eyes on that is a really powerful process. Down here in Tasmania, I worked with some students at the university who were trying to get the university to divest from fossil fuels, and that had a lot of struggles with the No campaign. And they decided to put forward a vision of similar process to Australia reMADE, put forward a vision for what they wanted. And within 24 hours, the VC had changed his tune and made a whole lot of concessions to what they were asking for, primarily because they gave him space to move and gave him space to see what we could do as a university rather than just being rabble students. So again, there is a definite time and place for saying no, but there is real power in saying yes. But of course, vision alone can be too insipid and critique too depressing. So they're not against each other. They're actually what we're trying to do with reMAKERS, which we've launched recently, which is sort of our educative side of things, is actually say these two things go together in a very powerful way. And that we need to unravel and critique to understand how we got to where we are and what that means. You know, neoliberalism was not inevitable. The rise of the motor vehicle was not inevitable. But how did it happen? And how can we learn from that, understand that, and take kind of courage from that fact that nothing is set in stone. And then the vision helps us to know where we want to go and know why we're spending hours feeling depressed about things. It's because we have somewhere hopeful to go. On that note, I'll hand over to Louise, who can kind of drill down into some of this work that we've been doing. And I'll click when you're ready, Louise.
Okay, thank you, Millie. I'd like to acknowledge that I'm coming tonight from the lands of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation and pay my respects to their elders, past, present and emerging. Also, just a slight footnote, Millie indicated the Secretariat members early on, and one that was missing was Kaz Goldie from ACOS. So just...
yes, thank you. I knew I'd missed one.
just to complete this circle. So look, we're trying to do a ridiculous thing tonight of, you know, talking about 4 massive things in a very short space of time, and Millie's already just sort of run over both the process but also the vision piece, which in itself was, you know, like a landmark achievement for the work that a lot of us have been doing over a number of years, and a crystallisation of a call that's been coming from progressives for a long time. So that in itself is a whole discussion. I'm going to try and cover another few bits of that, of the moment we're in and why this is so important for us to catch hold of and use to its fullest extent, and then do a little bit of the unravelling work, particularly around some of the problems that drive our current system in directions that we're not happy with. And then Millie will come back with some more detail on what new things, what new fronts we might be advancing. So this is skimming the surface, so apologies that this is going to be, you know, very superficial in some ways, but it's just to give you a little bit of a feel of what we're trying to do, but also give you a sense of what we're trying to explore further. And a lot of this is very much work in progress. So I just want to also say that a lot of what we're doing is we're just learning our way because we don't have a roadmap, and so it's very exploratory. And if you can't talk with us in a month's time, we'll probably have moved on or changed some of what we might say tonight, but it's an iterative process. I guess I just want to talk, next slide, thanks, Millie. So look, I do think there's something about this particular moment, and I don't just mean COVID, and I don't even mean the bushfire, although both are obviously loom large in our consciousness. But I think that for change makers generally who are interested in transformation, this is the sort of seminal period, I think, for change that we've faced really since 08, which was a missed opportunity where people and organisations just weren't ready to grasp that opportunity. And so I think it behoves us to really think very carefully over the next months and years that we don't just rush to be part of the sort of immediate incremental responses to the economic and social and health crisis that we're in, but we really do try to build very quickly a coalition of forces around a much bigger and more transformative agenda. And I say that because I think there's sort of both push and pull reasons for why this is a moment of transformation, of generational change. I think if we miss this for quite a period. Some of the push factors, I think that what we're facing is not just isolated crises, but a whole triggering of crises, non-linear impacts, tipping points that we don't even know whether they're ecological, whether they're economic, social, or political. I just think that this is we're entering into an era of what I guess we're starting to talk about of instability and insecurity. And in that context, things can go in many different directions. And I'll come back a bit to the notion of crisis and why that's so critical. The other thing is that, apologies for the phone in the background, we also have, I think, a political vacuum in which this is occurring. If you think about really the sort of dominant ideology of the last 40 or 50 years of neoliberalism, and that's morphed into different sort of flavourings in different countries, but essentially the core. I think that, you know, really since the last 10 years particularly, but the last 20 years, neoliberalism has been faltering, but it's the zombie that lives on, as we know. And so, but is increasingly incapable of responding to the sorts of very deep crises that we're facing. So there's a vacuum at the heart of the political ideology that's dominant. And I think increasingly we've got a polarisation of people, both in economic terms, but also social and political terms, and that particularly when we're going into deep economic downturns, and we've got really very catastrophic climate events occurring, that just creates all sorts of dimensions. So I think there's a whole range of push factors, and there's also some really significant pull factors that, because we tend to look at the negatives, we should always be conscious of the very positive things that are particularly over the last 6 months in Australia we've seen governments actually lead, and we've seen citizens appreciate leadership when it comes in ways that respond to obvious community need. We've seen governments fund things in ways that have got us out of that whole deficit focus, although we're being pulled back into it pretty rapidly. We've also seen an appreciation for universal services, whether it be firefighting, whether it be health or social security. There's a whole range of opportunities that people or a realisation of what's so critically important to hold us together as a nation. And we've also seen the importance of community and interconnectedness. So it's not like we're just seeing the downsides, we're also seeing what an alternate vision for this country can look like. Thanks, Millie. So I just want to just very briefly, and we can flesh this out further, or it's work we're only at an early stage in, so I'll just talk to it briefly. Basically, you know, when you're in extended periods of crisis and emergency and disaster, and they all have different sort of symbolism and narratives and responses, but effectively, I think we've got a range of dangers that we're facing in terms of the normalisation of crises and uncertainty as becoming just a way of life, and how people then respond to that. I think governments, in particular the state, is often using that to exceptionalise circumstances and create emergency powers or unusual sort of responses. And very often the people in the community are left to feel like these are individual issues that they've just got to wear the burden of and somehow internalise and respond to it. And interesting use, I reckon, of Morrison's word resilience for I think when he uses it, it's very much about individuals and families just sort of having to sort of bunker down and tough it out. on the other side, I think we should be advocating to de-exceptionalise these emergencies, partly because we should be demystifying that they're somehow unexpected or unpredictable. Actually, they're entirely predictable. They're entirely known. We know what's causing them, and we actually know what we can do about them in lots of cases. So I think we've got to really rethink how we ourselves talk about crisis and emergencies. We have to reconceptualise the possible, and we have to recollectivise about this is about systemic issues that we're dealing with. Therefore, you need collective and systemic responses, not individual responses. So that's my ridiculous 1 minute on crisis. So thanks, Millie. Next. And so basically, you know, I mean, we've had more than just neoliberalism, but it's a version of neoliberalism that's pretty much influenced you know, our world has certainly been structured since the 80s, and it's predicated around notions of freedom and liberty, private good, free markets, pro-market state, etc. And I guess around that are 5 notions in particular that I think that neoliberalism is particularly, and apologies, it's a slide I didn't have, but essentially what we've seen in Australia, I think, is 5 strategies. One is detaxation, which is essentially a gutting of the state, trying to run down the capacity of the state to do things. And already we're seeing, you know, today, the talk of bringing forward tax cuts, what an extraordinary sort of response to the moment. We've seen a demonising of the public. You see Morrison, and I'm not just picking on him, but it's just he's obviously front and centre of sort of a lot of the sort of government response. You see him saying he wants a private-led recovery, as if, you know, the public sector doesn't have a role in that or couldn't actually take that leadership role. We've seen so-called deregulation, although it's really a reconfiguring of the state to try and ensure that the state is the framework for markets to, or particular types of markets to rule. And we've seen very conscious attempts to decollectivise, whether it be particularly in the union movement, but also environment organisations, charities generally, civil society, media, you name it. There's been attempts to silence or to close down public spaces for dissent or even discussion. So, might just, next one, thanks, Millie. So I just want to recap on the sorts of values that I guess we're trying to build our agenda around. And these came out of the very early discussions in Australia reMADE. On the left-hand side, you see there's a range, 4 core values that I guess all our work centres around. The notion of equal worth of all, unity with nature, independence, and community. And so those values have been really the sort of the driving force. And then we've got a range of principles there as well that are complementary, and particularly that first one, cooperation, not competition, is something we've been trying to think a lot more about. So I just wanted to remind people that that's really the sort of bedrock of what we're trying to think about. Thanks, Millie. Okay, so what I want to do now is run through what we call the 5 Ds. So what we have is we had a vision that we developed, and people said, look, sounds fantastic, we want to embrace it, but what about the route there? You know, we're here now, that's over there. What's the sort of the bridge? What's the pathway that we can take? And what are some of the elements to building that path? And, you know, people wanted a silver bullet selection response. They wanted a policy that would answer, you know, the call. And so things like UBI or employment guarantees often get trotted out as being the panacea. And whilst they might have individual merits or not, all of them are policies that address some aspects of the problem, but of themselves are not sufficiently transformational that they will, you know, create the vision that we foresee. And so what we've been trying to do is unravel, as Millie said, what are some of the systemic drivers or areas that we think some changes have to be thought through. And whilst we haven't in any way got to a point of saying these are the strategies or policies that sit within these, we've tried to identify areas where we think further work and thinking needs to happen. So the first of these is democratise. And so we sort of saw two elements to this. And basically what we're saying here is that if you really want to have an effective democracy, it's not only about elections and representatives and etc. Those things are certainly important, but what are some of the underlying factors that determine whether in fact that's even achievable? And so, you know, we think that the concentration of wealth and power in Australia is critical to whether you can have an effective democracy. So you can't have, in our, I guess, view, extreme and growing inequality and still have an effective democracy. So it's about trying to think about how do we rebalance notions of wealth and power in the country. And the second aspect is you can't have effective democracy if you haven't got an engaged and active civil society and community. So how do you reconnect community engagement with more formal politics, more formal representative politics? So both of those elements need to be thought through. And what are some of the strategies? What are some of the responses to that? And certainly for that first one, responding to concentrated wealth and power goes right to the heart of the system. Thanks, Millie. The second one is decarbonise. Fairly obviously, this is about valuing and respecting nature's limits and living sustainably. Next one, thanks. De-monopolise. Sorry, I didn't spend a lot of time on decarbonise just because I think some of these are more self-evident than others. De-monopolise. So this is again goes back to this notion of concentrated power, and particularly this is speaking to concentrated corporate power. When you look at the economy and the market, I mean, it's interesting, you know, it bears no relationship to the early neoliberal thinkers, but obviously an accommodation was made with big capital somewhere in its evolution, and you now have major concentrations of corporate power and influence well beyond the capacity of states to regulate or individual citizens to have any recourse over. So what do you do about that? And obviously it's linked back to the other issue of concentrated wealth and power, but it also has its own distinct and the other thing that we want to try and do is go back a bit to the Galbraith sort of thinking of middle of last century and re-elevate the notion of countervailing voices or countervailing forces, re-legitimise the notion that in a democracy you need a pluralism of voices and organised voices if you're going to have some sort of containment on both the state and corporate power. Thanks, Millie. Next is de-marketise. So with de-marketise, this is about trying to reintroduce notions of red lines or blurred lines or however it's defined. What is it that should constitute public goods? What should be outside the purview of markets and profits? And so how do we redefine and revalorize public goods? And Millie's going to talk some more on that piece of work, which she's done a lot more thinking about. And how do we develop new indices around wellbeing and judge success in different ways? Thanks, Millie. And obviously, how do we think through how do you decolonise in a country like Australia? What does self-determination look like, and how can we be part of seeing that to fruition and building a different sort of future based on healing and a fair and just way forward? Thanks, Millie. So basically, in summary, just on those things, So we basically said that it should be so it's democratise, it's decarbonise, de-monopolise, de-marketise and decolonise. And in each of those areas, I guess what we're trying to do is say, if you took actions in each of those areas, is that sufficient to change some of the fundamental or foundational drivers that give expression to injustice, inequality, environmental destruction? So then just a few small questions for you, and hopefully you've got some answers for us, because all we're trying to do is build a framework, and that's pretty tough at the moment. So then finally, I'll just throw this up here, and it's probably all too much, but just so you know that this is something else we're thinking about. We actually started with this and then ended up back on the 5 Ds, but we started to say, well, how do you assess a UBI as to whether it's good, bad or indifferent? And so if you described a UBI to us, we might say one version is great and another isn't. So what might be the criteria that you would start to test any proposition by? And so we came up with a few things which, you know, again, feedback would be very useful on if we haven't nailed this. Is something going to have an enduring impact? And this is something that we certainly learned from the experience of neoliberals. The one thing that they were just totally focused on was permanent change. They wanted to embed change. And so enduring is important. Scalability. Too often we think small. So is the scale of the solution appropriate to the scale of the problem, or is it at least scalable, even if initially it's in an experimental or a pilot form? Is it values aligned? You know, you can't build transformational change off the wrong values. So have we got a consistent approach? Does it have a multiplier effect? Can we build off this? Does it address those 5 Ds that we have just gone through? And does it deliver across the pillars of the vision so that it's not just delivering on one siloed issue, but actually multiple siloed issues, or connecting those siloed issues? So that's just a sort of so we've got a framework there within which to think about potential policies, assuming the framework is sort of starting to look okay. And then when you've got particular policies, how much you test, assess, gauge or think about them. But out of all of that, one of the areas of work that we identified as being, I think, having a lot of traction in the moment is around public good. And I'll hand back to Millie, who's done some more work on that. Thank you.
Thanks, Louise. So as Louise said, we've gone vision, this is the heart stuff, you know, this is where we get the tears when we read the vision, this is the story of the dream of the Australia we want and who we are when we're at our best. Then we've got the work that Louise has been talking about, which is really what are the frameworks for helping us think through the strategies and the ideas to actually achieve the vision that we want, because a vision without some kind of plan isn't that helpful. And then we've been trying to dig down. I think there's really exciting opportunities for how we can connect. I'm not sure exactly who's on the call or where you all come from, but I think from speaking with Michelle, the work that everyone in NENA is doing, from the community gardens to the different local currencies to all of the different things that you do, the education, that this is where there's an opportunity to bring it all together and to think about how do we actually achieve what we want, and how do we make sure that the work that we are doing actually gets to those underlying drivers of power that Louise has talked about. So part of what we've been then doing is taking a deep dive into the idea of the public good. We've seen a lot of conversations around the fires, around COVID, I think even around the Black Lives Matter stuff about public good, the value of publicly provided services. So you look at the ABC, the trust in the ABC went through the roof during the bushfires. You look at how we're valuing our nurses, emergency services. So we're really seeing a loud valuing and an articulated valuing of the public good. So I started to think about, well, what is the public good? We throw this word around all the time, but what does it mean and how do we make it useful for ourselves? And And so there's probably lots of people who know the detailed technical economic definitions of public good, a public good, the commons, various different terms. Doesn't matter if you don't know them. I think they're useful to know in the background, but I wanted to think about when we talk about public good in the context of Australia reMADE, what are we talking about? And I think really that's about collectively making decisions as a community, as a society, that help to push forward the values that we have. So equality, community, love of nature, with the assumption of responsibility that we will leave a good legacy for generations to come. And as I've been thinking about public good, it suddenly dawned on me that we don't have, as a country, an answer to the why we do what we do. Like, what is the purpose of Australia as a country? Why are we doing anything? Why are we responding in any way? And that we tend to let the economy be a proxy for public goods. So if the economy is going well, then we're probably all fine. And we just know that that's not true, that's not real, and that measures like GDP are not counting the things that we want to be counting. So and I'm sure there's a wealth of knowledge in this call around some of that stuff, and it'd be really great to connect at some point. So, you know, it might be my age, it might be where I've got my history from, but it's really important, I think, for us to know what does the public good look like in Australia. And I've just chucked up a list on the slides here. It's by no means all the examples, but you know, in 1907 there was the Harvester decision and the idea that we should have a fair and reasonable wage. We had a means tested pension, so state provided pension. We won the 8-hour day, so there are rules around what is seen as a good balance between work, play and rest. In the 1940s, there was various introductions of different parts of the welfare state, you know, pension, unemployment and sickness benefits. You know, these are things that we have had and we come to take for granted, but have actually been fought for and imagined. And that's something we really need to work on, is the imagining. What could actually be and how could we do things differently? In the 80s, you know, the Franklin River was protected, and a different way of thinking about the public good in terms of the environment and natural landscapes. Medicare, you know, it's not perfect and it's being eroded, but we have we have a basis of an incredible universal healthcare scheme that, if you look in comparison to the US, you know, people with COVID are not leaving hospital with $10,000, $20,000, $30,000 debts. The Montreal Protocol, of course, a lot simpler than climate change, but Australia actually led the charge there and got people across the world talking about what we were going to do, because we were listening to the science and dealing with the precautionary principle. 2016, the gun laws that Howard brought in. You know, we have compulsory voting, we have the ABC, we have public toilets, we have national highways, national parks, bans on advertising, vaccination programs. You know, there are lots of examples in Australia where we do things and imagine systems and policies and programs for the public good. I can see someone has written in the comments that, I'm not sure which specifically, talking about there, but things have been eroded. And I think, yes, they really have, which is why it is important to remember our history here, to say, you know, that things have not always been eroded. We did once take for granted that you could go to university, maybe not take for granted, but you could get a free tertiary education. So we have done this before and we can do this again. And what were very radical ideas at the time became normalized. So we need to protect what we've got, but also think about the possibility to go forward. And again, in comparison to the US, you know, the gun laws, the health, all of those sorts of things, it's amazing how utopian our current system would look, despite its flaws and despite, you know, a lot of these things were not accessible universally, either to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, to women, to migrants, you know, but the foundations of what is possible are there. And, you know, I won't talk really about privatisation, but privatisation, weirdly in this country, politicians seem to kind of bang on about it a lot, yet every poll shows that Australians don't want privatisation. But the promise is, you know, it'll save money, it'll be efficient, and competition will ensure better quality. But the reality is, through lots of different studies. There's reduced standards, reduced quality, reduced access, reduced choice, reduced working conditions, reduced accountability, and increased costs. So across all the measures, really, reclaiming the public good is something quite important. And this is a bit of
I'm just aware of time, Millie.
Yep.
We're coming up to 7 o'clock.
Yep.
So just maybe if we can make sure we have time for questions and discussions. So just a little reminder.
Yeah, it would be about 1 minute, I think.
That's fine.
So what I've tried to do is think through a framework, building on the work of Louise, to think about, well, how do we think about the public good in new ways that actually give us handles to advocate for public good, to think through public good, and to make sure that that we are taking it to places that we want it. So as a way of thinking things through, we've got 3 categories for thinking about public good. So public good that is material, so things that, and these are loose categories, it goes across them, you know, it's purely a device for thinking. Hospitals, we've got things like schools, media, sewage systems. These are all the types of public goods that you can see, feel, touch, smell. And we have contextual public goods. So that's population health, that's a safe climate, that's privacy, democracy. It's kind of an environment that we exist in, that we intentionally make the decision that these are good things. And then to push the boundaries a bit, we've been thinking about capacities. So imagination, time, community trust. These are all the things that you need to actually maintain that unsexy thing of maintenance of the hospitals, of population health, and that are being eroded for many different reasons. So these categories are just to help us think through where could our imagination go in terms of public good. And I think a lot of things the NENA network does, again, is similar there in terms of thinking through what are new ways of doing things. So a reminder that what was radical is now normal. And so what next? So mindful of time, I won't go through them all. It's really just to chuck it up there to remind you of these things. But there is a movement across the world of people reclaiming the public good in a whole lot of different ways. And using the terrible phrase like remunicipalisation, which no one can say. But, you know, there's making drinking water freely available in France and Paris. They've also got sparkling drinking water because apparently that's an essential public service. But, you know, the things that we take for granted, less so over there. They've dramatically reduced the price of pharmaceuticals in Mexico by creating 40 new public organisations. So there's all of these examples around the world. And in Australia, you know, we're seeing a real pushback. You're seeing the conversations coming up around COVID of should we nationalise our hospitals? Should we buy the airlines? So these things are becoming conversations that are much more easily gaining traction at the moment. I encourage you to click on the link and read the Future is Public report, which is quite exciting in terms of where people are reclaiming new ways of taking up public space. So I think from an Australia reMADE perspective, what we want to do next is to start thinking about what does it look like to reimagine this public space. And to be really bold in that imagining, you know, what does a really strong ABC look like? Or how could we claim physical space? How could we claim internet space in the name of the public good? So I can chuck the links up in the chat as someone has requested. Really what we would love Australia reMADE to be for people is a place to go for one, sorry, I see that about the chat. One is it's a place where we've done some of the high level thinking about how the different pieces fit together. So we're not all scrabbling an individual, you know, climate or social justice. And we would love to be involved in conversations as these ideas get developed, because this isn't work that can be, the frameworks for thinking through how we create deep transformational change cannot be done by just a small group of us. We're all going to have to do this together, and we're very willing to share our work and take feedback, and yeah, build on other people's ideas, have people build on our ideas. So the links are there on the slides. The slides will be available, but we can chuck them in the chat as well. And I think we'll probably, hopefully, if there's time for questions, would be great.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much, Millie and Louise, for sharing with us some of the work, the history, and some of the current framing of what Australia reMADE is doing. It's really excellent and terrific to see. And as an immediate response, you know, as you and I have discussed, Millie, there's some lovely crossovers in terms of the core concepts and the work that you guys have been developing. NENA has been thinking about very similar issues, sometimes reframing it like the public good has been a huge issue in the work that people are doing about take back the economy, reclaiming the commons, you know, reclaiming nature, our role in nature, all those kinds of things. But there's so much that's really beneficial there. So I did notice there was one question and several other comments. So I might just go, there was a question about pricing, but if anyone, so first of all, sorry, I've had a very long day. I'm a bit vague. First of all, I forgot to acknowledge country, and I apologise. I am on the Yagara and Turrbal people's land in Brisbane, and also wanted to say thank you so much. Like, here's a little thank you for your presentations and your talks, and we will put the recording from tonight and the PowerPoints onto the NENA webinar page. If you ever go onto that page, you'll see that every webinar we have, you can click on the recordings and such. So all the links will be available. Don't worry about that. But while I'm quickly finding that other question, can folks maybe think, if you've got any questions, either type them in or just sort of give us a wave. Someone asked about, can we talk about pricing? Could we discuss the role of the price mechanism? I don't know if that's clear enough, or whether that's a question about neoliberalism and market-based economics as a whole. It's from Michelle Smith. I don't know if you want to elaborate on your question.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes, just.
Alrighty, so here we are. So just a quick question. So it seems to me that the price mechanism is a really important way to actually influence human behaviour. And I'm particularly concerned about the price of fossil fuels. I think we need to rapidly increase the price of fossil fuels, and that will translate towards sustainability throughout the economy. I think it's an incredibly important opportunity, and we can use the money to help people pay for energy. If we actually recycle some of the revenue back to those who need it, they'll still be faced with a price differential. So you can compensate people for who need it, who are, so everybody is confronted with the price change.
Okay, I think I get the question. Thanks, Michelle. Louise or Millie, did you want to talk about how this level of detail fits into your bigger picture thinking? Thanks, Michelle.
Look, don't have all the answers by any means, but great question, Michelle. I mean, I think there's two layers to it. One is the whole notion. I mean, neoliberalism essentially created a whole value system where value of anything and everyone was equated through a price mechanism. So there's a much bigger sort of ideological question around price and its use to assign value and worth in our society, which needs to be deconstructed. But I think the specifics around fossil fuel go to things like, you know, I mean, at a very, you know, easy level, I mean, the state actually props up the fossil fuel industry through subsidies and all sorts of preferential treatment. And so there's a whole range of supports that actually you know, you can think about if you reconceptualise the role of the state vis-a-vis things that are not in the public good once they're identified. But I think the second thing is that notion of externalities, about how do we start to ensure that corporates actually pay for the extended damage or impact that they have in society. And so there's some of the things, particularly in that de-monopolise category, we're trying to think about, because the reason that some of those corporations have been able to build such massive empires is off the harm that they've been able to avoid payment for on society, the environment, etc. So there's a very quick and simple, bit simplistic response, but I do think critical issue.
Thank you. I'm just going to quickly run through some of these other questions. Catherine asks, how are we as individuals or organisations able to engage in this work, meaning the work of Australia reMADE? What is the process? Yeah, that might do for the question.
Yeah, and I saw you're from Earthworker there, and I've actually been really inspired by what Earthworker is doing, and think it's a really great example of reclaiming the public good. So I would love to chat more about that. I think in terms of how different people get involved, there's a few different ways. First of all, it's the boring way, but if you get on our mailing list, we only send things out, you know, once every 6 weeks or so. But often we'll put a call there of saying, we're doing this thinking, we're trying this out, we'd love people to engage with us. So that's a good way to kind of know when there's opportunities. How we tend to have been working is with different types of people, either sort of thinkers or practitioners. I mean, they're often very interconnected, obviously, they're not two separate categories. But having conversations with organisations about how are these ideas helpful and what would it look like for you to implement this. So, for example, we've worked with Julie Lyford in Gloucester, who ran that. They fought the Rocky Hill coal mine. They're trying to bring the community together. They run Sustainable Futures conventions every year, and so they ran their entire program around Australia reMADE, around the 9 pillars, as a new way to get into problems that didn't just come from an environmental lens, but actually brought people together across the community. And it was an amazing event to be at. So there's those ways of people are picking what we've done and running with it as their own. And I'm more than happy to have a chat with anyone who's trying to think about that stuff. We've also got on the website some resources for organisations in terms of messaging stuff. So how do you speak vision in a way that is effective but doesn't kind of leave you looking naive and disconnected from the hard realities, and then also a reflection guide for organisations. And you can do that from, you know, whether it's your parents group to your big organisation, about how do you think through whether your organisation is doing transformational work. And these are just guides, you know, as Louise says, we don't have the answers, but they're helpful questions. We've got the questions perhaps that help steer things in a particular direction. And partly how we have been working is, you know, just hopefully responding to another question there is, this work is getting out because we work closely with a lot of different progressive organisations and individuals within those organisations as a bit of a, how is this idea helpful for what you're doing and what you're saying, and how can we understand your situation better to make sure that what we're doing and what we're producing in terms of easy access knowledge is also helpful. So we work in a lot of relations, a very relational way with lots of people. So yeah, there is not a traditional pathway in some ways for involvement, but hopefully that makes sense.
Thank you. There's a couple of other questions here. I'm just trying to see if I can group any of them together. That's okay. There's a question here about responses or replacement for the GDP as a measure. But there's also a couple of comments about measuring the increase or decrease in the public good is difficult. Measuring the economy is easier, and partly why we're going back to it. Did you want to make a few comments generally about measuring well-being or measuring the public good, that kind of idea?
Yeah. Do you want to go, Louise?
No, I don't mind. I can.
Go for it.
Look, there are a range of different options around. You know, there've been a few trials of different things. There's the global, what is it? The GPI, is it? There's a range of different, and there's the Melbourne Uni project. Look, we haven't got into the specifics, but I think GDP doesn't tell you a lot. And in fact, GDP tells us that, you know, potentially that the bushfires increase productivity in Australia, you know, like production in Australia. So it's problematic on many scores. So I think it's agreed that that is a very singular and one-dimensional view of the world. We do need different sorts of indices. So, you know, part of the public, I mean, part of the work we're going to be doing over the rest of this year is going out talking to a whole range of organisations around public good. And one of the things will be part of that is, well, how do you actually, you know, how do you identify those things? It goes to purpose. If you're clear about your purpose for your nation and for your governments and your public sector and your services, then you can start to at least relativise what's important, even if it's not entirely quantifiable, but at least you can get a sense of what the priorities and therefore the big allocations of funding and resources and should be. So we've got to be a bit careful we don't just fall into the trap of defining everything by a dollar value, but it is about trying to develop new sense of priorities as well as different mechanisms for assessing progress.
Yeah, and if I can add a little bit from the New Economy Network perspective, the Ecological Economics Hub has been focusing on discussions about the decades worth of work that have been trying to develop alternatives to GDP, whether it's the Happiness Index, the Progress Indicator, the Australian National Development Index, ANDI, which is trying to be, you know, uniquely suited to Australia, and also just the sheer rejection of trying to measure certain aspects of society, but trying to focus on a different value set completely. Certainly with my other hat on as the Australian Earth Laws Alliance, what we're interested in is, for example, flourishing ecological health measured by, you know, healthy interactions of biodiversity, as opposed to solely human-centered values or measurements. So if you're interested in alternatives to GDP and all those kinds of things, please do stay on or join the NENA mailing list as we develop. The one thing that I forgot to mention in our opening remarks is the development of our civil society strategy and action plan for a different or new economy. One of the key issues that will be in there is really collating some of the great work that's been done by the Wellbeing Economy Alliance, Kate Raworth, Catherine Trebek, folks that we work with pretty closely, and pulling a lot of that into some of our civil society development, development of the strategy. And certainly I'll be trying to make sure that we stay connected with Australia reMADE and the work they do around public good, so that we can share, you know, some of the work that dozens and dozens and hundreds of people across Australia are doing inside the new economy. So if you are interested in alternatives to GDP, let's all make sure we stay in touch, because there's a lot of interesting stuff going on in there. There was another question, comments about, I guess, corporations paying up means stabilisation of business, taxes are higher, corporate taxes. Yeah, I'm not sure if that's a question. Oh, there's the question I wanted. How do you bring in a substitute for GDP? Thank you, we've covered that. Sally has asked a question which is perhaps a bit difficult to answer, but a very lovely, encouraging question for Australia reMADE. Is there scope for these great ideas and others to establish broad credibility and have a big influence in this time of change? I think the short answer is we hope so, but what do you say to that, Millie and Louise?
I mean, I think one of the real challenges, and this links a bit to measurement, one of the real challenges of what we're doing, and we've always used the language of we're trying to change the air that we breathe. So we're trying to make this stuff not be an add-on, but just a common sense, you know, a common sense to think about purpose, a common sense to put the values of community, nature, interconnectedness just as just normal and what you do. And so I think, you know, there's been a much bigger, the really exciting thing about the COVID moment, the bushfire moment, you know, as Louise said, the bigger moment than all of that is that people are starting to at least reach towards that kind of air. I think my metaphors are getting mixed, but, you know, there is a real sense of people actually starting to think, hang on, life on the busy treadmill pre-COVID wasn't all it was cracked up to be. You know, life at home is not all it's cracked up to be, but can we do things differently? Because normal isn't working anymore. So I actually think, you know, what the saying about the ideas that are lying around are the ideas that are being picked up. So I think our job collectively, and I have so much more hope than I did prior to this year, is that we are actually starting to leave ideas around that are being picked up and don't have an obvious origin. And I think that's when we start to get that kind of traction, but it's very unglorious work to do because you can't get the credit, you can't measure it directly if you're the ones who've achieved it. So I think, you know, it's exciting because we can all do it together, but it takes a particular type of courage, I think, to change the air. Yeah.
Yeah, great. Someone's asking a number of questions about how organisations and processes that help connect to nature. I just made one suggestion in there, Joanna Macy's groundbreaking work, and there's a ton of practitioners around Australia who look at, it's called The Work That Reconnects. I know in Brisbane, 3 different people who do it. I think you're asking about Tasmania. Please do have a little Google search for anyone who's doing some of that deep ecology or ecology practitioner work. And also if you can't find great folks, then please just drop me a line with my other hat on, convener@earthlaws.org.au. We have a nice network of people doing all manner of connecting to nature kinds of activities. So please get in touch if you can't find folks in other ways. So yeah, I'm just looking, Millie, you've been watching too. If you see questions that I'm missing, please do just jump in. It's the kind of time of night where all help is appreciated when we're staring at Zoom. I've been on Zoom since 7 a.m. this morning, so it's
There's a question from someone about the Gloucester process of community engagement across boundaries, please. So the people there, they're called Gloucester, the forum is called Gloucester Sustainable Futures Convention, and Julie Lyford is the kind of powerhouse there. But Groundswell Gloucester, if you look that up, they're very willing to talk to people about what they did. So they're a very divided community after, you know, they beat coal seam gas and a coal mine. And I mean, I've certainly found that the model that they used in Gloucester, Australia reMADE is the 9 pillars, you know, take them, use them, run with them, make your own. But that helped people come from whatever angle that they wanted to. So they invited in their community people to talk about gender issues, environment, education, community, parents groups. So I think it was a good model of engagement, and even just getting people together and saying, what do you want as a starting point, even without the pillars, creates a very different context in a room to enable conversations. So I'm not sure if I think that, but email me if you want to be put in touch. That would be fine.
excellent. I noticed someone has suggested to somebody else local futures. I think that was for Ross in Tasmania. And I just want to mention a little plug for one of our NENA webinars in August is Helena Norberg-Hodge, who's the founder of Local Futures, will be a guest speaker. I think it's the 4th of August. Forgive my little note there. Again, on the NENA website, Helena and myself and a few others had organised a really lovely gathering in Byron Bay this year, just before, it was been planned for a long time and it had to be shut down as a in-person event because of COVID. So NENA is connected to Local Futures and the economics of happiness in gentle relationship ways. And yeah, if you want to find out more, please join us that evening on the webinar or shoot them an email. If there are other questions, we're very open for, you know, another, we're still open for business for another 5, 10, 20 minutes, 12 minutes actually. But whilst we're waiting for more questions, I just wanted to quickly let folks know, if you're not already aware, that NENA's, what we've been doing, our process was we built for several years the governance structure for NENA to exist as kind of self-perpetuating hubs all around Australia. But also what we're doing this year, now that all of our hubs have little feet and are running around doing their own thing, is inviting people to share their ideas with us. And I've just noticed that the link is down, the template's not there. But we have been running monthly online meetings this year with anywhere from 50 to 70 people joining those discussions, just telling folks about why we're trying to pull together what we're calling a sort of, not just a shared vision, but an action plan based on the fact that everyone who's connecting into particular sectoral hubs or geographic hubs have expertise and knowledge and ideas and things they're already working on. And what we're inviting people to do is to share their expertise and knowledge into a process where you pretty much fill out this fairly simple template. And we're going to be collating it, not in any way changing the language or the ideas, but finding where the common ground is, finding where the areas of unique difference might be between members within NENA or hubs, and then pulling it all together as our way of collating the beginnings of a strategy and an action plan for very specific transformational pathways inside NENA. So our core underpinning values are social justice, social and economic justice, and ecological health. They've always been our simple guiding principles. And now the development of this strategy based on a co-created way of everyone sharing their ideas. I'm actually quite excited. I have no idea if we'll get 7 ideas or 72. We've already got the food hub, the ecological economics hub, the education hub, and a couple of others have pooled their ideas into templates. And next week, for those who are interested, we have the next monthly discussion. Our First Nations group will be sharing some of their ideas. So leading Aboriginal philosopher Mary Graham, who's a really close friend of mine and an amazing thinker, and also Ross Williams, who's a co-founder of Future Dreaming and an NRM expert. They'll be sharing their thoughts with us next Wednesday night is the next one. Again, all that info is available on the NENA website. And Millie's shared the link there again. Yep, Karen Jones is referring to Dumbo Feather, also provides inspiring stories of people and projects. Yeah, Dumbo Feather's excellent. And I think Millie, you've been working with the group behind Dumbo Feather. So yeah, all these interconnections are really excellent. So look, it's coming up to 7:20. If there are small giants, that's it. Thank you. Thank you. Are there any other burning questions? Otherwise, we might slowly start to wrap up and release you back into the wild. No? And may I comment with great praise and yet perhaps a bit of concern too, that at this point, I think our entire group of 30 could be all women. How interesting. I'm not sure. I shouldn't be assuming that, given there are certain names that are non-definable, but power to the chicks. Oh, there's a bloke. Thank you. Power to the men as well, of course. Sorry, it's getting late in my long work day. I would like to start, yes, you've also noticed, but at least 2 miles, that's good. I would like to start wrapping up and really want to say thank you to everyone. Thank you so much, Millie and Louise, for sharing these insights into your wonderful, wonderful work. I'll certainly be looking at the 9 pillars and thinking about ways that NENA can kind of both promote and utilize some of the work and the thinking that you're already doing. Yeah, just really keen for everybody on our call to connect with Australia reMADE. Millie's shared the links there, and connect with NENA if you're not already. And we've got a few people shooting some notes in saying thank you, really great and good to be connecting. And I guess the final comment I would make is, you know, if you're involved in most of the people who connect to NENA, and perhaps this is the same for Australia reMADE, you're already involved with amazing projects, amazing initiatives. If you can think of any other ways where we can all connect better, please do let us know. I mean, it's why some of us spend so much time running webinars and conferences and events. We're doing real project development as well, but these opportunities are how we find out about what everyone's up to. And I wouldn't want to speak for Millie or Louise, but I'm sure, like myself, we're all sticky beaks. We want to know what everyone's up to. We're all hungry for the good stuff and we want to share and promote each other. So that's about it from me. Millie and Louise, did you want to say good night or some final words?
Thank you very much, and look forward to being in touch with everyone in different ways.
Yeah, excellent. Thank you so much, everybody. Okay.
Thanks.
I'm just pausing a little bit in case there's anything else. No. Yes, someone just put, thank you, a very worthwhile extension to our long days on Zoom. Exactly. I think we're all in Zoom land. Thank you so much, everyone. And as I said, the recording for tonight, and Millie, if you could email me your presentation, I'll put it all on the website in the next couple of days. So
Will do.
keep an eye on the websites, and thank you, girls and guys.
And boys.
Exactly. Thank you, lovely people.
Yeah.
And we'll see you
Bye.
very soon. Good night.
Good night.